Chapter 45 of Eldorado by Baroness Orczy. Read for LibriVox.org by Karen Savage in September 2007. Chapter 45. The Forest of Boulogne. Progress was not easy and very slow along the muddy road. The two coaches moved along laboriously, with wheels creaking and sinking deeply from time to time in the quagmire. When the small party finally reached the edge of the wood, the greyish light of this dismal day had changed in the west to a dull reddish glow, a glow that had neither brilliance nor incandescence in it, only a weird tint that hung over the horizon and turned the distance into lines of purple. The nearness of the sea made itself already felt. There was a briny taste in the damp atmosphere, and the trees all turned their branches away in the same direction against the onslaught of the prevailing winds. The road at this point formed a sharp fork, skirting the wood on either side, the forest lying like a black, close mass of spruce and firs on the left, while the open expanse of country stretched out on the right. The southwesterly gale struck with full violence against the barrier of forest trees, bending the tall crests of the pines, and causing their small dead branches to break and fall with a sharp, crisp sound like a cry of pain. The squad had been fresh at starting. Now the men had been 4 hours in the saddle under persistent rain and gusty wind. They were tired, and the atmosphere of the close, black forest so near the road was weighing upon their spirits. Strange sounds came to them from out of the dense network of trees, the screeching of night birds, the weird call of the owls, the swift and furtive tread of wild beasts on the prowl. The cold winter and lack of food had lured the wolves from their fastnesses, hunger had emboldened them, and now, as gradually the grey light fled from the sky, dismal howls could be heard in the distance, and now and then a pair of eyes, bright with the reflection of the lurid western glow, would shine momentarily out of the darkness like tiny glow-worms, and as quickly vanish away. The men shivered, more with vague superstitious fear than with cold. They would have urged their horses on, but the wheels of the coaches stuck persistently in the mud, and now again a halt had to be called so that the spokes and axles might be cleared. They rode on in silence. No one had a mind to speak, and the mournful soughing of the wind in the pine trees seemed to check the words on every lip. The dull thud of hoofs in the soft road, the clang of steel bits and buckles, the snorting of the horses alone answered the wind, and also the monotonous creaking of the wheels ploughing through the ruts. Soon the ruddy glow in the west faded into soft-toned purple, and then into grey. Finally that too vanished. Darkness was drawing in on every side like a wide black mantle pulled together closer and closer overhead by invisible giant hands. The rain still fell in a thin drizzle that soaked through caps and coats, made the bridles slimy and the saddles slippery and damp. A veil of vapour hung over the horses' cruppers, and was rendered fuller and thicker every moment with the breath that came from their nostrils. The wind no longer blew with gusty fury. Its strength seemed to have been spent with the grey light of day, but now and then it would still come sweeping across the open country and dash itself upon the wall of forest trees, lashing against the horses' ears, catching the corner of a mantle here, an ill-adjusted cap there, and wreaking its mischievous freak for a while, and then with a sigh of satisfaction die, murmuring among the pines. Suddenly there was a halt, much shouting, a volley of oaths from the drivers, and citizen Chauvelin thrust his head out of the carriage window. "What is it?" he asked. "The scouts, citizen," replied the sergeant, who had been riding close to the coach door all this while. "They have returned. Tell one man to come straight to me and report." Marguerite sat quite still. Indeed, she had almost ceased to live momentarily, for her spirit was absent from her body, which felt neither fatigue, nor cold, nor pain. But she heard the snorting of the horse close by as its rider pulled him up sharply beside the carriage door. "Well?" said Chauvelin curtly. "This is the crossroad, citizen," replied the man. "It strikes straight into the wood, and the hamlet of Le Croc lies down in the valley on the right." "Did you follow the road in the wood?" "Yes, citizen. About 2 leagues from here there is a clearing with a small stone chapel, more like a large shrine, nestling among the trees. Opposite to it the angle of a high wall with large wrought iron gates at the corner, and from these a wide drive leads through a park." "Did you turn into the drive?" "Only a little way, citizen. We thought we had best report first that all is safe." "You saw no one?" "No one." "The chateau, then, lies some distance from the gates?" "A league or more, citizen. Close to the gates there are outhouses and stabling, the disused buildings of the home farm, I should say." "Good, we are on the right road, that is clear. Keep ahead with your men now, but only some 200 metres or so. Stay!" he added, as if on second thoughts, "ride down to the other coach and ask the prisoner if we are on the right track." The rider turned his horse sharply round. Marguerite heard the clang of metal and the sound of retreating hoofs. A few moments later the man returned. "Yes, citizen," he reported, "the prisoner says it is quite right. The Chateau d'Ourde lies a full league from its gates. This is the nearest road to the chapel and the chateau. He says we should reach the former in half an hour. It will be very dark in there," he added with a significant nod in the direction of the wood. Chauvelin made no reply, but quietly stepped out of the coach. Marguerite watched him, leaning out of the window, following his small trim figure as he pushed his way past the groups of mounted men, catching at a horse's bit now and then, or at a bridle, making a way for himself amongst the restless, champing animals without the slightest hesitation or fear. Soon his retreating figure lost its sharp outline silhouetted against the evening sky. It was enfolded in the veil of vapour which was blown out of the horses' nostrils, or rising from their damp cruppers. It became more vague, almost ghost-like, through the mist and the fast-gathering gloom. Presently a group of troopers hid him entirely from her view, but she could hear his thin, smooth voice quite clearly as he called to Citizen Heron. "We are close to the end of our journey now, citizen," she heard him say. "If the prisoner has not played us false, little Capet should be in our charge within the hour." A growl not unlike those that came from out the mysterious depths of the forest answered him. "If he is not," and Marguerite recognised the harsh tones of Citizen Heron, "if he is not, then 2 corpses will be rotting in this wood tomorrow for the wolves to feed on, and the prisoner will be on his way back to Paris with me." Someone laughed. It might have been one of the troopers, more callous than his comrades, but to Marguerite the laugh had a strange familiar ring to it, the echo of something long since past and gone. Then Chauvelin's voice once more came clearly to her ear. "My suggestion, citizen," he was saying, "is that the prisoner shall now give me an order, couched in whatever terms he may think necessary, but a distinct order to his friends to give up Capet to me without any resistance. I could then take some of the men with me, and ride as quickly as the light will allow up to the chateau, and take possession of it, of Capet, and of those who are with him. We could get along faster thus. One man can give up his horse to me and continue the journey on the box of your coach. The 2 carriages could then follow at foot pace. But I fear that if we stick together complete darkness will overtake us, and we might find ourselves obliged to pass a very uncomfortable night in this wood." "I won't spend another night in this suspense. It would kill me," growled Heron to the accompaniment of one of his choicest oaths. "You must do as you think right. You planned the whole of this affair. See to it that it works out well in the end." "How many men shall I take with me? Our advance guard is here, of course." "I couldn't spare you more than 4 more men. I shall want the others to guard the prisoners." 4 men will be quite sufficient, with the 4 of the advance guard. That will leave you 12 men for guarding your prisoners, and you really only need to guard the woman. Her life will answer for the others." He had raised his voice when he said this, obviously intending that Marguerite and Armand should hear. "Then I'll ahead," he continued, apparently in answer to an assent from his colleague. "Sir Percy, will you be so kind as to scribble the necessary words on these tablets?" There was a long pause, during which Marguerite heard plainly the long and dismal cry of a night bird that, mayhap, was seeking its mate. Then Chauvelin's voice was raised again. "I thank you," he said. "This certainly should be quite effectual. And now, Citizen Heron, I do not think that under the circumstances we need fear an ambuscade or any kind of trickery. You hold the hostages, and if by any chance I and my men are attacked, or if we encounter armed resistance at the chateau, I will despatch a rider back straight away to you, and, well, you will know what to do." His voice died away, merged in the soughing of the wind, drowned by the clang of metal, of horses snorting, of men living and breathing. Marguerite felt that beside her Armand had shuddered, and that in the darkness his trembling hand had sought and found hers. She leaned well out of the window, trying to see. The gloom had gathered more closely in, and round her the veil of vapour from the horses' steaming cruppers hung heavily in the misty air. In front of her the straight lines of a few fir trees stood out dense and black against the greyness beyond, and between these lines purple tints of various tones and shades mingled one with the other, merging the horizon line with the sky. Here and there a more solid black patch indicated the tiny houses of the hamlet of Le Croc, far down in the valley below. From some of these houses small lights began to glimmer like blinking yellow eyes. Marguerite's gaze, however, did not rest on the distant landscape. It tried to pierce the gloom that hid her immediate surroundings. The mounted men were all round the coach, more closely round her than the trees in the forest. But the horses were restless, moving all the time, and as they moved she caught glimpses of that other coach, and of Chauvelin's ghost-like figure walking rapidly through the mist. Just for one brief moment she saw the other coach, and Heron's head and shoulders leaning out of the window. His sugar-loaf hat was on his head, and the bandage across his brow looked like a sharp pale streak below it. "Do not doubt it, citizen Chauvelin," he called out loudly in his harsh, raucous voice. "I shall know what to do. The wolves will have their meal tonight, and the guillotine will not be cheated either." Armand put his arm round his sister's shoulders and gently drew her back into the carriage. "Little mother," he said, "if you can think of a way whereby my life would redeem Percy's and yours, show me that way now." But she replied quietly and firmly, "There is no way, Armand. If there is, it is in the hands of God." End of chapter 45. Chapter 46 of Eldorado by Baroness Orczy, read for LibriVox.org by Karen Savage in September 2007. Chapter 46. Others in the Park. Chauvelin and his picked escort had in the meanwhile detached themselves from the main body of the squad. Soon the dull thud of their horses' hoofs, treading the soft ground, came more softly, then more softly still as they turned into the wood, and the purple shadows seemed to enfold every sound and finally to swallow them completely. Armand and Marguerite from the depth of the carriage heard Heron's voice ordering his own driver now to take the lead. They sat quite still and watched, and presently the other coach passed them slowly on the road, its silhouette standing out ghostly and grim for a moment against the indigo tones of the distant country. Heron's head, with its battered sugar-loaf hat and the soiled bandage round the brow, was as usual out of the carriage window. He leered across at Marguerite when he saw the outline of her face framed by the window of the carriage. "Say all the prayers you have ever known, citizeness," he said with a loud laugh, "that my friend Chauvelin may find Capet at the chateau, or else you may take a last look at the open country, for you will not see the sun rise on it tomorrow. It is one or the other, you know." She tried not to look at him. The very sight of him filled her with horror. That blotched, gaunt face of his, the fleshy lips, that hideous bandage across his face that hid one of his eyes. She tried not to see him and not to hear him laugh. Obviously, he too laboured under the stress of great excitement. So far everything had gone well. The prisoner had made no attempt at escape, and apparently did not mean to play a double game. But the crucial hour had come, and with it darkness and the mysterious depths of the forest with their weird sounds and sudden flashes of ghostly lights. They naturally wrought on the nerves of men like Heron, whose conscience might have been dormant, but whose ears were nevertheless filled with the cries of innocent victims sacrificed to their own lustful ambitions and their blind, unreasoning hates. He gave sharp orders to the men to close up round the carriages, and then gave the curt word of command, "En avant!" Marguerite could but strain her ears to listen. All her senses, all her faculties had merged into that of hearing, rendering it doubly keen. It seemed to her that she could distinguish the faint sound, that even as she listened grew fainter and fainter yet, of Chauvelin and his squad moving away rapidly into the thickness of the wood some distance already ahead. Close to her there was the snorting of horses, the clanging and noise of moving mounted men. Heron's coach had taken the lead. She could hear the creaking of its wheels, the calls of the driver urging his beasts. The diminished party was moving at foot-pace in the darkness that seemed to grow denser at every step, and through that silence which was so full of mysterious sounds. The carriage rolled and rocked on its springs. Marguerite, giddy and overtired, lay back with closed eyes, her hand resting in that of Armand. Time, space and distance had ceased to be. Only death, the great lord of all, had remained. He walked on ahead, scythe on skeleton shoulder, and beckoned patiently, but with a sure, grim hand. There was another halt. The coach wheels groaned and creaked on their axles. One or two horses reared with the sudden drawing up of the curb. "What is it now?" came Heron's hoarse voice through the darkness. "It is pitch dark, citizen," was the response from ahead. "The drivers cannot see their horses' ears. They wait to know if they may light their lanterns and lead their horses." "They can lead their horses," replied Heron roughly, "but I'll have no lanterns lighted. We don't know what fools may be lurking behind trees, hoping to put a bullet through my head, or yours, sergeant. We don't want to make a lighted target of ourselves, what?
But let the drivers lead their horses, and one or two of you who are riding greys might dismount too and lead the way. The greys would show up perhaps in this cursed blackness." While his orders were being carried out, he called out once more, "Are we far now from that confounded chapel?" "We can't be far, citizen. The whole forest is not more than 6 leagues wide at any point, and we have gone 2 since we turned into it."
"Hush!" Heron's voice suddenly broke in hoarsely. "What was that? Silence, I say! Damn you, can't you hear?" There was a hush, every ear straining to listen, but the horses were not still. They continued to champ their bits, to paw the ground, and to toss their heads, impatient to get on. Only now and again would there come a lull even through these sounds, a second or two mayhap, of perfect, unbroken silence, and then it seemed as if right through the darkness a mysterious echo sent back those same sounds, the champing of bits, the pawing of soft ground, the tossing and snorting of animals, human life that breathed far out there among the trees. "It is citizen Chauvelin and his men," said the sergeant after a while, and speaking in a whisper.
"Silence, I want to hear!" came the curt, hoarsely whispered command.
Once more everyone listened, the men hardly daring to breathe, clinging to their bridles and pulling on their horses' mouths, trying to keep them still. And again through the night there came like a faint echo, which seemed to throw back those sounds that indicated the presence of men and of horses not very far away.
"Yes, it must be citizen Chauvelin," said Heron at last,
but the tone of his voice sounded as if he were anxious and only half convinced.
"But I thought he would be at the chateau by now."
"He may have had to go at foot pace. It is very dark, citizen Heron," remarked the sergeant.
"En avant then," quoth the other. "The sooner we come up with him the better."
And the squad of mounted men, the 2 coaches, the drivers and the advanced section who were leading their horses slowly, restarted on the way. The horses snorted, the bits and stirrups clanged, and the springs and wheels of the coaches creaked and groaned dismally as the ramshackle vehicles began once more to plough the carpet of pine needles that lay thick upon the road. But inside the carriage, Armand and Marguerite held one another tightly by the hand.
"It is de Batz with his friends," she whispered scarce above her breath.
"De Batz?" he asked, vaguely and fearfully, for in the dark he could not see her face, and as he did not understand why she should suddenly be talking of de Batz, he thought with horror that mayhap her prophecy anent herself had come true, and that her mind, wearied and overwrought, had become suddenly unhinged.
"Yes, de Batz," she replied. "Percy sent him a message through me to meet him here. I am not mad, Armand," she added more calmly. "Sir Andrew took Percy's letter to de Batz the day that we started from Paris."
"Great God!" exclaimed Armand, and instinctively, with a sense of protection, he put his arms round his sister. "Then if Chauvelin or the squad is attacked, if—" "Yes," she said calmly, "if de Batz makes an attack on Chauvelin, or if he reaches the chateau first and tries to defend it, they will shoot us, Armand, and Percy."
"But is the Dauphin at the Chateau d'Ourde?"
"No, no, I think not."
"Then why should Percy have invoked the aid of de Batz, now when—"
"I don't know," she murmured helplessly. "Of course, when he wrote the letter he could not guess that they would hold us as hostages. He may have thought that under cover of darkness and of an unexpected attack he might have saved himself had he been alone. But now that you and I are here... oh, it is all so horrible, and I cannot understand it all."
"Hark!"
broke in Armand, suddenly gripping her arm more tightly.
"Halt!"
rang the sergeant's voice through the night. This time there was no mistaking the sound. Already it came from no far distance. It was the sound of a man running and panting, and now and again calling out as he ran. For a moment there was stillness in the very air. The wind itself was hushed between 2 gusts. Even the rain had ceased its incessant pattering. Heron's harsh voice was raised in the stillness.
"What is it now?" he demanded.
"A runner, citizen," replied the sergeant, "coming through the wood from the right."
"From the right?"
And the exclamation was accompanied by a volley of oaths.
"The direction of the chateau? Chauvelin has been attacked. He is sending a messenger back to me. Sergeant, close up round that coach. Guard your prisoners as you value your life, and—"
The rest of his words were drowned in a yell of such violent fury that the horses, already over nervous and fidgety, reared in mad terror, and the men had the greatest difficulty in holding them in. For a few moments noisy confusion prevailed, until the men could quieten their quivering animals with soft words and gentle pattings. Then the troopers obeyed, closing up round the coach wherein brother and sister sat huddled against one another. One of the men said under his breath, "Oh, but the citizen agent knows how to curse. One day he will break his gullet with the fury of his oaths." In the meanwhile the runner had come nearer, always at the same breathless speed.
The next moment he was challenged. "Qui va là?" "A friend," he replied, panting and exhausted. "Where is citizen Heron?" "Here," came the reply in a voice hoarse with passionate excitement. "Come up, damn you, be quick." "A lantern, citizen," suggested one of the drivers. No, not now. Here, where the devil are we?" "We are close to the chapel on our left, citizen," said the sergeant. The runner, whose eyes were no doubt accustomed to the gloom, had drawn nearer to the carriage. "The gates of the chateau," he said, still somewhat breathlessly, "are just opposite here on the right, citizen. I have just come through them." "Speak up, man!" and Heron's voice now sounded as if choked with passion. "Citizen Chauvelin sent you?" "Yes. He bade me tell you that he has gained access to the chateau, and that Capet is not there." A series of citizen Heron's choicest oaths interrupted the man's speech. Then he was curtly ordered to proceed, and he resumed his report. "Citizen Chauvelin rang at the door of the chateau. After a while he was admitted by an old servant, who appeared to be in charge, but the place seemed otherwise absolutely deserted, only what? Go on, what is it?" "As we rode through the park, it seemed to us as if we were being watched and followed. We heard distinctly the sound of horses, behind and around us, but we could see nothing. And now, when I ran back, again I heard. There are others in the park tonight besides us, citizen." There was silence after that. It seemed as if the flood of Heron's blasphemous eloquence had spent itself at last. "Others in the park!" And now his voice was scarcely above a whisper, hoarse and trembling. "How many? Could you see?" "No, citizen, we could not see, but there are horsemen lurking round the chateau now. Citizen Chauvelin took 4 men into the house with him and left the others on guard outside. He bade me tell you that it might be safer to send him a few more men, if you could spare them. There are a number of disused farm buildings quite close to the gates, and he suggested that all the horses be put up there for the night, and that the men come up to the chateau on foot. It would be quicker and safer, for the darkness is intense." Even while the man spoke, the forest in the distance seemed to wake from its solemn silence. The wind on its wings brought sounds of life and movement, different from the prowling of beasts or the screeching of night birds. It was the furtive advance of men, the quick whispers of command, of encouragement, of the human animal preparing to attack his kind. But all in the distance still, all muffled, all furtive as yet. "Sergeant!" It was Heron's voice, but it too was subdued and almost calm now. "Can you see the chapel?" "More clearly, citizen," replied the sergeant. "It is on our left, quite a small building, I think." "Then dismount and walk all round it. See that there are no windows or door in the rear." There was a prolonged silence, during which those distant sounds of men moving, of furtive preparations for attack, struck distinctly through the night. Marguerite and Armand, clinging to one another, not knowing what to think nor yet what to fear, heard the sounds mingling with those immediately around them, and Marguerite murmured under her breath, "It is de Batz and some of his friends, but what can they do? What can Percy hope for now?" But of Percy she could hear and see nothing. The darkness and the silence had drawn their imperceptible veil between his unseen presence and her own consciousness. She could see the coach in which he was, but Heron's hideous personality, his head with its battered hat and soiled bandage, had seemed to obtrude itself always before her gaze, blotting out from her mind even the knowledge that Percy was there, not 50 yards away from her. So strong did this feeling grow in her, that presently the awful dread seized upon her, that he was no longer there, that he was dead, worn out with fatigue and illness brought on by terrible privations, or if not dead, that he had swooned, that he was unconscious, his spirit absent from his body. She remembered that frightful yell of rage and hate which Heron had uttered a few minutes ago. Had the brute vented his fury on his helpless, weakened prisoner, and stilled forever those lips that, mayhap, had mocked him to the last? Marguerite could not guess. She hardly knew what to hope. Vaguely, when the thought of Percy lying dead beside his enemy floated through her aching brain, she was almost conscious of a sense of relief at the thought that at least he would be spared the pain of the final, inevitable cataclysm. End of chapter 46. Chapter 47 of Eldorado by Baroness Orczy. Read for LibriVox.org by Karen Savage in September 2007. Chapter 47. The Chapel of the Holy Sepulchre. The sergeant's voice broke in upon her misery. The man had apparently done as the citizen agent had ordered, and had closely examined the little building that stood on the left, a vague black mass more dense than the surrounding gloom. "It is all solid stone, citizen," he said. "Iron gates in front, closed but not locked, rusty key in the lock which turns quite easily, no windows or door in the rear." "You are quite sure?" "Quite certain, citizen. It is plain solid stone at the back, and the only possible access to the interior is through the iron gate in front." "Good."
Marguerite could only just hear Heron speaking to the sergeant. Darkness enveloped every form and deadened every sound. Even the harsh voice which she had learned to loathe and to dread sounded curiously subdued and unfamiliar. Heron no longer seemed inclined to storm, to rage, or to curse. The momentary danger, the thought of failure, the hope of revenge, had apparently cooled his temper, strengthened his determination, and forced his voice down to a little above a whisper. He gave his orders clearly and firmly, and the words came to Marguerite on the wings of the wind, with strange distinctness, borne to her ears by the darkness itself and the hush that lay over the wood.
"Take 6 men with you, sergeant," she heard him say, "and join citizen Chauvelin at the chateau. You can stable your horses in the farm buildings close by, as he suggests, and run to him on foot. You and your men should quickly get the best of a handful of midnight prowlers. You are well armed, and they only civilians. Tell citizen Chauvelin that I, in the meanwhile, will take care of our prisoners. The Englishman I shall put in irons and lock up inside the chapel, with 5 men under the command of your corporal to guard him. The other 2 I will drive myself straight to Crécy with what is left of the escort. You understand?"
"Yes, citizen."
"We may not reach Crécy until 2 hours after midnight, but directly I arrive I will send citizen Chauvelin further reinforcements, which, however, I hope may not be necessary, but which will reach him in the early morning. Even if he is seriously attacked, he can, with the 14 men he will have with him, hold out inside the castle throughout the night. Tell him also that at dawn the 2 prisoners who will be with me will be shot in the courtyard of the guard-house at Crécy, but that whether he has got hold of Capet or not, he had best pick up the Englishman in the chapel in the morning, and bring him straight to Crécy, where I shall be awaiting him, ready to return to Paris. You understand?"
"Yes, citizen."
"Then repeat what I said."
"I am to take 6 men with me to reinforce citizen Chauvelin now."
"Yes."
"And you, citizen, will drive straight back to Crécy, and will send us further reinforcements from there, which will reach us in the early morning."
"Yes."
"We are to hold the chateau against those unknown marauders, if necessary, until the reinforcements come from Crécy. Having routed them, we return here, pick up the Englishman, whom you will have locked up in the chapel under a strong guard commanded by Corporal Cassard, and join you forthwith at Crécy.
This, whether citizen Chauvelin has got hold of Capet or not."
"Yes, citizen, I understand," concluded the sergeant imperturbably, "and I am also to tell citizen Chauvelin that the 2 prisoners will be shot at dawn in the courtyard of the guard-house at Crécy."
"Yes, that is all. Try to find the leader of the attacking party, and bring him along to Crécy with the Englishmen, but unless they are in very small numbers, do not trouble about the others. Now, en avant! Citizen Chauvelin might be glad of your help. And stay, order all the men to dismount, and take the horses out of one of the coaches, then let the men you are taking with you each lead a horse, or even 2, and stable them all in the farm buildings. I shall not need them, and could not spare any of my men for the work later on. Remember that, above all, silence is the order. When you are ready to start, come back to me here."
The sergeant moved away, and Marguerite heard him transmitting the citizen agent's orders to the soldiers. The dismounting was carried on in wonderful silence, for silence had been one of the principal commands. Only 1 or 2 words reached her ears. "First section and first half of the second section fall in, right wheel. First section each take 2 horses on the lead. Quietly now there, don't tug at his bridle, let him go." And after that a simple report. "All ready, citizen."
"Good," was the response. "Now detail your corporal and 2 men to come here to me, so that we may put the Englishman in irons and take him at once to the chapel, and 4 men to stand guard at the doors of the other coach."
The necessary orders were given, and after that there came the curt command,
"En avant!"
The sergeant, with his squad and all the horses, was slowly moving away in the night. The horses' hoofs hardly made a noise on the soft carpet of pine needles and of dead fallen leaves, but the champing of the bits was of course audible, and now and then the snorting of some poor tired horse longing for its stable. Somehow in Marguerite's fevered mind this departure of a squad of men seemed like the final flitting of her last hope. The slow agony of the familiar sounds, the retreating horses and soldiers moving away amongst the shadows, took on a weird significance. Heron had given his last orders. Percy, helpless and probably unconscious, would spend the night in that dank chapel, while she and Armand would be taken back to Crécy, driven to death like some insentient animals to the slaughter. When the grey dawn would first begin to peep through the branches of the pines, Percy would be led back to Paris and the guillotine, and she and Armand will have been sacrificed to the hatred and revenge of brutes. The end had come, and there was nothing more to be done. Struggling, fighting, scheming could be of no avail now. But she wanted to get to her husband. She wanted to be near him now that death was so imminent both for him and for her. She tried to envisage it all, quite calmly, just as she knew that Percy would wish her to do. The inevitable end was there, and she would not give to these callous wretches here the gratuitous spectacle of a despairing woman fighting blindly against adverse fate. But she wanted to go to her husband. She felt that she could face death more easily on the morrow if she could but see him once more, if she could but look once more into the eyes that had mirrored so much enthusiasm, such absolute vitality and whole-hearted self-sacrifice, and such an intensity of love and passion. If she could but kiss once more those lips that had smiled through life, and would smile, she knew, even in the face of death. She tried to open the carriage door, but it was held from without, and a harsh voice cursed her, ordering her to sit still. But she could lean out of the window and strain her eyes to see. They were by now accustomed to the gloom, the dilated pupils taking in pictures of vague forms, moving like ghouls in the shadows. The other coach was not far, and she could hear Heron's voice, still subdued and calm, and the curses of the men, but not a sound from Percy. "I think the prisoner is unconscious," she heard one of the men say. "Lift him out of the carriage, then," was Heron's curt command, "and you go and throw open the chapel gates." Marguerite saw it all. The movement, the crowd of men, two vague black forms lifting another one, which appeared heavy and inert, out of the coach, and carrying it staggering up towards the chapel. Then the forms disappeared, swallowed up by the more dense mass of the little building, merged in with it, immovable as the stone itself. Only a few words reached her now. "He is unconscious." "Leave him there, then. He'll not move." "Now close the gates." There was a loud clang, and Marguerite gave a piercing scream. She tore at the handle of the carriage door. "Armand! Armand! Go to him!" she cried, and all her self-control, all her enforced calm, vanished in an outburst of wild, agonizing passion. "Let me get to him, Armand! This is the end! Get me to him, in the name of God!" "Stop that woman screaming!" came Heron's voice clearly through the night. "Put her and the other prisoner in irons, quick!" But while Marguerite expended her feeble strength in a mad, pathetic effort to reach her husband, even now at this last hour, when all hope was dead and death was so nigh, Armand had already wrenched the carriage door from the grasp of the soldier who was guarding it. He was of the south, and knew the trick of charging an unsuspecting adversary with head thrust forward like a bull inside a ring. Thus he knocked one of the soldiers down, and made a quick rush for the chapel gates. The men, attacked so suddenly and in such complete darkness, did not wait for orders. They closed in round Armand. One man drew his sabre and hacked away with it in aimless rage. But for the moment he evaded them all, pushing his way through them, not heeding the blows that came on him from out the darkness. At last he reached the chapel. With one bound he was at the gate, his numb fingers fumbling for the lock which he could not see. It was a vigorous blow from Heron's fist that brought him at last to his knees, and even then his hands did not relax their hold. They gripped the ornamental scroll of the gate, shook the gate itself in its rusty hinges, pushed and pulled with the unreasoning strength of despair. He had a sabre cut across his brow, and the blood flowed in a warm, trickling stream down his face. But of this he was unconscious. All that he wanted, all that he was striving for with agonizing heartbeats and cracking sinews, was to get to his friend who was lying in there unconscious, abandoned, dead perhaps. "Curse you!" struck Heron's voice close to his ear. "Cannot some of you stop this raving maniac?" Then it was that the heavy blow on his head caused him a sensation of sickness, and he fell on his knees, still gripping the ironwork. Stronger hands than his were forcing him to loosen his hold. Blows that hurt terribly rained on his numbed fingers. He felt himself dragged away, carried like an inert mass further and further from that gate which he would have given his life-blood to force open. And Marguerite heard all this from the inside of the coach, where she was imprisoned as effectually as was Percy's unconscious body inside that dark chapel. She could hear the noise and scramble and Heron's hoarse commands, the swift sabre strokes as they cut through the air. Already a trooper had clapped irons on her wrists. Two others held the carriage doors. Now Armand was lifted back into the coach, and she could not even help to make him comfortable, though as he was lifted in she heard him feebly moaning. Then the carriage doors were banged to again. "Do not allow either of the prisoners out again, or peril of your lives," came with a vigorous curse from Heron. After which there was a moment's silence. Whispered commands came spasmodically in deadened sound to her ear. "Will the key turn?" "Yes, citizen."
All secure?"
"Yes, citizen, the prisoner is groaning."
"Let him groan."
"The empty coach, citizen? The horses have been taken out."
"Leave it standing where it is, then. Citizen Chauvelin will need it in the morning."
"Armand," whispered Marguerite inside the coach, "did you see Percy?" "It was so dark," murmured Armand feebly, "but I saw him just inside the gates where they had laid him down. I heard him groaning. Oh, my God!" "Hush, dear," she said, "we can do nothing more, only die as he lived, bravely and with a smile on our lips, in memory of him."
"Number 35 is wounded, citizen," said one of the men. "Curse the fool who did the mischief," was the placid response. "Leave him here with the guard." "How many of you are there left, then?" asked the same voice a moment later.
"Only 2, citizen, if one whole section remains with me at the chapel door, and also the wounded man."
"2 are enough for me, and 5 are not too many at the chapel door."
And Heron's coarse, cruel laugh echoed against the stone walls of the little chapel.
"Now then, one of you get into the coach and the other go to the horses' heads. And remember, Corporal Cassard, that you and your men who stay here to guard that chapel door are answerable to the whole nation with your lives for the safety of the Englishmen."
The carriage door was thrown open, and a soldier stepped in and sat down opposite Marguerite and Armand. Heron in the meanwhile was apparently scrambling up the box. Marguerite could hear him muttering curses as he groped for the reins, and finally gathered them into his hand. The springs of the coach creaked and groaned as the vehicle slowly swung round. The wheels ploughed deeply through the soft carpet of dead leaves. Marguerite felt Armand's inert body leaning heavily against her shoulder. "Are you in pain, dear?" she asked softly. He made no reply, and she thought that he had fainted. It was better so. At least the next dreary hours would flit by for him in the blissful state of unconsciousness. Now at last the heavy carriage began to move more evenly. The soldier at the horses' heads was stepping along at a rapid pace. Marguerite would have given much even now to look back once more at the dense black mass, blacker and denser than any shadow that had ever descended before on God's earth, which held between its cold, cruel walls all that she loved in the world. But her wrists were fettered by the irons, which cut into her flesh when she moved. She could no longer lean out of the window, and she could not even hear. The whole forest was hushed, the wind was lulled to rest, wild beasts and night birds were silent and still, and the wheels of the coach creaked in the ruts, bearing Marguerite with every turn further and further away from the man who lay helpless in the chapel of the Holy Sepulchre. End of chapter 47. Chapter 48 of Eldorado by Baroness Orczy, read for LibriVox.org by Karen Savage in September 2007. Chapter 48. The Waning Moon. Armand had wakened from his attack of faintness, and brother and sister sat close to one another, shoulder touching shoulder. That sense of nearness was the one tiny spark of comfort to both of them on this dreary, dreary way. The coach had lumbered on unceasingly since all eternity, so it seemed to them both. Once there had been a brief halt, when Heron's rough voice had ordered the soldier at the horses' heads to climb on the box beside him, and once, it had been a very little while ago, a terrible cry of pain and terror had rung through the stillness of the night. Immediately after that, the horses had been put at a more rapid pace, but it had seemed to Marguerite as if that one cry of pain had been repeated by several others, which sounded more feeble, and soon appeared to be dying away in the distance behind. The soldier who sat opposite to them must have heard the cry too, for he jumped up, as if wakened from sleep, and put his head out of the window. "Did you hear that cry, citizen?" he asked. But only a curse answered him, and a peremptory command not to lose sight of the prisoners by poking his head out of the window. "Did you hear the cry?" asked the soldier of Marguerite as he made haste to obey. "Yes. What could it be?" she murmured. "It seems dangerous to drive so fast in this darkness," muttered the soldier. After which remark he, with the stolidity peculiar to his kind, figuratively shrugged his shoulders, detaching himself, as it were, of the whole affair. "We should be out of the forest by now," he remarked in an undertone a little while later. "The way seemed shorter before." Just then the coach gave an unexpected lurch to one side, and after much groaning and creaking of axles and springs, it came to a standstill, and the citizen agent was heard cursing loudly and then scrambling down from the box. The next moment the carriage door was pulled open from without, and the harsh voice called out peremptorily, "Citizen soldier, here, quick, quick, curse you! We'll have one of the horses down if you don't hurry." The soldier struggled to his feet. It was never good to be slow in obeying the citizen agent's commands. He was half asleep, and no doubt numb with cold and long sitting still. To accelerate his movements he was suddenly gripped by the arm and dragged incontinently out of the coach. Then the door was slammed to again, either by a rough hand or a sudden gust of wind, Marguerite could not tell. She heard a cry of rage and one of terror, and Heron's raucous curses. She cowered in the corner of the carriage with Armand's head against her shoulder, and tried to close her ears to all those hideous sounds. Then suddenly all the sounds were hushed, and all around everything became perfectly calm and still, so still that at first the silence oppressed her with a vague, nameless dread. It was as if nature herself had paused, that she might listen, and the silence became more and more absolute, until Marguerite could hear Armand's soft, regular breathing close to her ear. The window nearest to her was open, and as she leaned forward with that paralysing sense of oppression, a breath of pure air struck full upon her nostrils, and brought with it a briny taste, as if from the sea. It was not quite so dark, and there was a sense as of open country stretching out to the limits of the horizon. Overhead a vague greyish light suffused the sky, and the wind swept the clouds in great rolling banks right across that light. Marguerite gazed upward with a more calm feeling that was akin to gratitude. That pale light, though so wan and feeble, was thrice welcome after that inky blackness wherein shadows were less dark than the lights. She watched eagerly the bank of clouds driven by the dying gale. The light grew brighter and faintly golden. Now the banks of clouds, storm-tossed and fleecy, raced past one another, parted and reunited like veils of unseen giant dancers waved by hands that controlled infinite space, advanced and rushed and slackened speed again, united and finally tore asunder, to reveal the waning moon, honey-coloured and mysterious, rising as if from an invisible ocean far away. The one light spread over the wide stretch of country, throwing over it as it spread dull tones of indigo and of blue. Here and there sparse stunted trees with fringed gaunt arms bending to prevailing winds proclaimed the neighbourhood of the sea. Marguerite gazed on the picture which the waning moon had so suddenly revealed, but she gazed with eyes that knew not what they saw. The moon had risen on her right. There lay the east, and the coach must have been travelling due north, whereas Crécy... In the absolute silence that reigned she could perceive from far, very far away, the sound of a church clock striking at the midnight hour, and now it seemed to her supersensitive senses that a firm footstep was treading the soft earth, a footstep that drew nearer, and then nearer still. Nature did pause to listen. The wind was hushed, the night birds in the forest had gone to rest. Marguerite's heart beat so fast that its throbbings choked her, and a dizziness clouded her consciousness. But through this state of torpor she heard the opening of the carriage door, she felt the onrush of that pure briny air, and she felt a long burning kiss upon her hands. She thought then that she was really dead, and that God in his infinite love had opened to her the outer gates of paradise. "My love," she murmured. She was leaning back in the carriage, and her eyes were closed, but she felt that firm fingers removed the irons from her wrists, and that a pair of warm lips were pressed there in their stead. "There, little woman, that's better so, is it not? Now let me get hold of poor Armand." It was heaven, of course, else how could earth hold such heavenly joy? "Percy!" exclaimed Armand in an awed voice. "Hush, dear," murmured Marguerite feebly. "We are in heaven, you and I," whereupon a ringing laugh woke the echoes of the silent night. "In heaven, dear heart!" and the voice had a delicious earthly ring in its whole-hearted merriment. "Please God, you'll both be at Portel with me before dawn." Then she was indeed forced to believe. She put out her hands and groped for him, for it was dark inside the carriage. She groped and felt his massive shoulders leaning across the body of the coach, while his fingers busied themselves with the irons on Armand's wrist. "Don't touch that brute's filthy coat with your dainty fingers, dear heart," he said gaily. "Great Lord, I have worn that wretch's clothes for over 2 hours. I feel as if the dirt had penetrated to my bones." Then, with that gesture so habitual to him, he took her head between his two hands, and drawing her to him until the wan light from without lit up the face that he worshipped, he gazed his fill into her eyes. She could only see the outline of his head silhouetted against the wind-tossed sky. She could not see his eyes, nor his lips, but she felt his nearness, and the happiness of that almost caused her to swoon. "Come out into the open, my lady fair," he murmured, and though she could not see, she could feel that he smiled. "Let God's pure air blow through your hair and round your dear head. Then, if you can walk so far, there's a small halfway house close by here. I have knocked up the none too amiable host. You and Armand could have half an hour's rest there before we go further on our way." "But you, Percy, are you safe?" "Yes, m'dear, we're all of us safe until morning. Time enough to reach Le Portel and to be aboard the Daydream before mine amiable friend Monsieur Chambertin has discovered his worthy colleague lying gagged and bound inside the chapel of the Holy Sepulchre. By gad, how old Heron will curse the moment he can open his mouth." He half helped, half lifted her out of the carriage. The strong, pure air suddenly rushing right through to her lungs made her feel faint, and she almost fell. But it was good to feel herself falling, when one pair of arms amongst the millions on the earth were there to receive her. "Can you walk, dear heart?" he asked. "Lean well on me. It is not far, and the rest will do you good. But you, Percy?" He laughed, and the most complete joy of living seemed to resound through that laugh. Her arm was in his, and for one moment he stood still, while his eyes swept the far reaches of the country, the mellow distance still wrapped in its mantle of indigo, still untouched by the mysterious light of the waning moon. He pressed her arm against his heart, but his right hand was stretched out towards the black wall of the forest behind him, towards the dark crests of the pines in which the dying wind sent its last mournful sighs. "Dear heart," he said, and his voice quivered with the intensity of his excitement, "beyond the stretch of that wood, from far away over there, there are cries and moans of anguish that come to my ear even now. But for you, dear, I would cross that wood tonight and re-enter Paris tomorrow. But for you, dear, but for you," he reiterated earnestly as he pressed her closer to him, for a bitter cry had risen to her lips. She went on in silence. Her happiness was great as was her pain. She had found him again, the man whom she worshipped, the husband whom she thought never to see again on earth. She had found him, and not even now, not after those terrible weeks of misery and suffering unspeakable, could she feel that love had triumphed over the wild, adventurous spirit, the reckless enthusiasm, the ardour of self-sacrifice. End of chapter 48.
Chapter 49 of Eldorado by Baroness Orczy. Read for LibriVox.org by Karen Savage in September 2007. Chapter 49. The Land of Eldorado. It seems that in the pocket of Heron's coat there was a letter case with some few hundred francs. It was amusing to think that the brute's money helped to bribe the ill-tempered keeper of the halfway house to receive guests at midnight, and to ply them well with food, drink, and the shelter of a stuffy coffee-room. Marguerite sat silently beside her husband, her hand in his. Armand, opposite to them, had both elbows on the table. He looked pale and wan, with a bandage across his forehead, and his glowing eyes were resting on his chief. "Yes, you demmed young idiot," said Blakeney merrily. "You nearly upset my plan in the end, with your yelling and screaming outside the chapel gates." "I wanted to get to you, Percy. I thought those brutes had got you there inside that building." "Not they!" he exclaimed. "It was my friend Heron whom they had trussed and gagged, and whom my amiable friend Monsieur Chambertin will find in there tomorrow morning. By gad, I would go back if only for the pleasure of hearing Heron curse when first the gag is taken from his mouth." "But how was it all done, Percy? And there was de Batz." "De Batz was part of the scheme I had planned for mine own escape, before I knew that those brutes meant to take Marguerite and you as hostages for my good behaviour. What I hoped then was that under cover of a tussle or a fight I could somehow or other contrive to slip through their fingers. And you know my belief in bald-headed fortune with the one solitary hair. Well, I meant to grab that hair, and at the worst I could but die in the open and not caged in that awful hole like some noxious vermin. I knew that de Batz would rise to the bait. I told him in my letter that the Dauphin would be at the Chateau d'Ourde this night, but that I feared the revolutionary government had got wind of this fact, and were sending an armed escort to bring the lad away. This letter Ffoulkes took to him. I knew that he would make a vigorous effort to get the Dauphin into his hands, and that during the scuffle that one hair on Fortune's head would, for 1 second only mayhap, come within my reach. I had so planned the expedition that we were bound to arrive at the Forest of Boulogne by nightfall, and night is always a useful ally. But at the guard-house of the Rue Saint-Anne, I realised for the first time that those brutes had pressed me into a tighter corner than I had preconceived. He paused, and once again that look of recklessness swept over his face, and his eyes, still hollow and circled, shone with the excitement of past memories. "I was such a weak, miserable wretch then," he said in answer to Marguerite's appeal. "I had to try and build up some strength, when, heaven forgive me for the sacrilege, I had unwittingly risked your precious life, dear heart, in that blind endeavour to save mine own. By gad, it was no easy task in that jolting vehicle with that noisome wretch beside me for sole company.
Yet I ate and I drank and I slept for 3 days and 2 nights, until the hour when in the darkness I struck Heron from behind, half strangled him first, then gagged him, and finally slipped into his filthy coat and put that loathsome bandage across my head, and his battered hat above it all. The yell he gave when first I attacked him made every horse rear. You must remember it. The noise effectually drowned our last scuffle in the coach. Chauvelin was the only man who might have suspected what had occurred, but he had gone on ahead, and bald-headed Fortune had passed by me, and I had managed to grab its one hair. After that it was all quite easy. The sergeant and the soldiers had seen very little of Heron, and nothing of me. It did not take a great effort to deceive them, and the darkness of the night was my most faithful friend. His raucous voice was not difficult to imitate, and darkness always muffles and changes every tone. Anyway, it was not likely that those loutish soldiers would even remotely suspect the trick that was being played on them. The citizen agent's orders were promptly and implicitly obeyed. The men never even thought to wonder that after insisting on an escort of 20 men, he should drive off with 2 prisoners and only 2 men to guard them. If they did wonder, it was not theirs to question. Those 2 troopers are spending an uncomfortable night somewhere in the Forest of Boulogne, each tied to a tree, and some 2 leagues apart one from the other. And now," he added gaily, "en voiture, my fair lady, and you too, Armand. 'Tis 7 leagues to Le Portel, and we must be there before dawn." Sir Andrew's intention was to make for Calais first, there to open communication with the Daydream, and then for Le Portel, said Marguerite. After that he meant to strike back for the Chateau d'Ourde in search of me. Then we'll still find him at Le Portel. I shall know how to lay hands on him, but you too must get aboard the Daydream at once, for Ffoulkes and I can always look after ourselves. It was 1 hour after midnight when, refreshed with food and rest, Marguerite, Armand and Sir Percy left the halfway house. Marguerite was standing in the doorway, ready to go. Percy and Armand had gone ahead to bring the coach along. "Percy," whispered Armand, "Marguerite does not know?" "Of course she does not, you young fool," retorted Percy lightly. "If you try and tell her, I think I would smash your head." "But you," said the young man with sudden vehemence, "can you bear the sight of me? My God, when I think..." "Don't think, my good Armand. Not of that, anyway. Only think of the woman for whose sake you committed a crime. If she is pure and good, woo her and win her. Not just now, for it were foolish to go back to Paris after her, but anon, when she comes to England, and all these past days are forgotten. Then love her as much as you can, Armand. Learn your lesson of love better than I have learnt mine. Do not cause Jeanne Lange those tears of anguish which my mad spirit brings to your sister's eyes. You were right, Armand, when you said that I do not know how to love." But on board the Daydream, when all danger was past, Marguerite felt that he did. End of chapter 49. End of Eldorado by Baroness Orczy.